Okay, thank you all for coming out here this morning. I'm certainly proud to stand along Colonel Atkinson and some of the members and training team here of Louisville's BRAVEST, and that's the men and women of the Louisville Fire Department that are watching after our city each and every day. You know, we see the police out a lot. Sometimes people are happy to see the police, sometimes not so much. People are always happy to see the fire department because they are running into situations where everybody else is running out of. And it takes a special kind of person and a dedicated public servant with a big heart to take on that type of duty knowingly. And they do their job well. Also, over the past several years, Louisville Fire Department has become internationally accredited, one of only 200 departments to achieve such accreditation in the country or to receive a Class 1 ISO rating. In other words, they're amongst the best of the best. And this also is a lean and efficient operation. That's something you're going to hear us continually talk about. Since 1994, the Louisville Fire Department has shrunk by 5 fire companies and 90 positions on the street. In that time, run volume has increased 300%, from 11,000 in 1994 to 43,000 in 2018. Another example of doing more with less. So we're incredibly proud of them and the life-saving work that they do each and every day. So we know that they're willing to give their lives for us. The question is, what is it that we're willing to do for them and for our city? A critical question, because last week we outlined the devastating budget cuts that we'll have to make primarily because of pension obligations, new pension obligations as defined by the Kentucky retirement system. It's a bill that we've been handed through no fault of our own, but we're legally required to pay it. And let's be clear, the city of Louisville has paid their pension obligations 100% of the time. This is an extraordinary event by the Kentucky pension system sending us a bill. That's something we really want to make sure people understand. Through no fault of anybody up here, this bill has arrived, but we have to deal with it. What are we talking about? It's a $35 million budget problem next year. It's a $65 million budget problem over the next 4 years. People say, okay, well, just cut, but don't cut public safety. Well, the challenge with that is that 2/3 of our budget is public safety. So in order to make reductions, you have to go where the money is. So the cuts are simply too big to make without impacting public safety. We're talking about reducing our police force by 250 officers over the next 4 years, taking 3 ambulances off the street, and closing 4 fire stations. It goes on and on. 4 library branches, no funding for external agency funding, no funding for community ministries, etc. You all have seen the full list of $65 million. Our city has huge momentum. These cuts are unwise and they are unacceptable. Throughout the next couple weeks, we're going to be going around town and putting the real face on what these cuts look like and the impact that they're going to have on our city, where our city is today and where we want to go in the future. So today, we want to focus on Louisville Fire, so I'd like to introduce Colonel Atkinson, who's going to talk about what these cuts would mean to the Louisville Fire Department. Colonel?
Thank you, Mayor. Welcome to the council members and everyone to the Louisville Fire Department Training Academy. I'm Colonel Rick Atkinson, Assistant Chief with the Louisville Fire Department. I'd like to detail what budget cuts would mean for the Louisville Division of Fire. While devastating is an appropriate term to describe the consequences of the potential cuts for some agencies, the consequences would be beyond devastating for emergency services. We respond to citizens in crisis situations throughout the day, every day, where seconds are critical to survival. For the LFD, these cuts could potentially have life or death consequences for citizens and firefighters. It's important for the public to understand that early notification and quick response are essential on emergency incidents. Fires burn hotter and grow faster than in the past, so immediate response is more important than ever. These cuts would significantly impact our ability to respond in an appropriate time frame with adequate staffing. As Mayor Fischer described, we are busier than ever. To reiterate, since 1994, we have lost 5 fire companies and 90 positions on the street. We are lean and efficient. It's a challenge to maintain response times with our current staffing. Benchmark goals for response times are derived from the NFPA standards, the National Fire Protection Association, who provides standards as best practices and recommendations. Specifically, for the stations that have been identified to close, they represent over 7,400 responses. 549 of those responses were fires. 3,446 of those were medical calls. Specifically, Engine 15 at 1328 South Preston Street responded to over 2,000 responses. Engine 1 at 1100 Grade Lane responded to 935 incidents. Engine 20 at 1735 Bardstown Road responded to over 1,500 emergency incidents. And lastly, Engine 17 at 1824 Garland Avenue responded to 2,926 emergency responses. Obviously, run volume would have to be absorbed by the surrounding units, and that would increase our response times into those areas and the surrounding areas. Response time increases result in potential loss of our accreditation and threatens our Class 1 ISO rating, the results of which could result in the insurance service office rating increase for our insurance rates if that were to increase from a Class 1. Our duty and obligation to the community and people we serve is to protect life and property. We're one of the best trained and well-equipped departments in the world, but it becomes impossible to provide world-class emergency response without an appropriate number of responders. Now I'd like to thank Mayor Fischer and the Metro Council for visiting us today and seeing the hard work that our recruits and instructors put into developing quality firefighters. These recruits will graduate in early March, and they will be assigned to a unit on the street serving the Louisville community. Please take time to look around before you leave today and talk to the instructors or the recruits about the work that they've done here at the Academy. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel. Appreciate your work and the whole team's work here each and every day. And as I've said to them, we will be fighting to make sure that we can raise the type of revenue, tax revenue that we have here in the city to make sure we don't have to cut our critical city services and impact fine people like this and their families. Next up, we will hear from Metro Council President David James. President?
I'd just like to say good morning to everybody, and I'd also like to say thank you to the Colonel and the rest of the men and women of the Louisville Fire Department. Just a couple years ago, the Metro Council members had the opportunity to train with the Fire Department, and it reassured my belief that you could never pay me to be a fireman. I don't have it in me. But these people do. And what they do for us every single day is amazing. And they put their lives on the line for us every single day. If we don't have the revenue to pay them to do that job, then we put the rest of the city at risk. And the responsibility of government, the number one responsibility of government, is the safety of its citizens. During this whole conversation, I've had people talk to me about, well, we can do with less police and we can do with less fire. Well, the fact is we're running extremely lean already. And less police, less fire, less public safety means it has major impact on the lives of the people of this community. And so as we talk about the situation that we're in, it's impossible for us to do both. It's impossible for us to continue the same services that we have today after July 1 if we don't have new revenue. And so I just want to say thank you to the men and women of the fire department. Thank you to my colleagues on Metro Council, and I want everybody in the community to understand that we as the Metro Council don't, and the mayor, don't sit here and say, gee, I think it'd be great to raise taxes, because that's not what we want to do. It's as the mayor said, we were handed this responsibility to do, and we don't have the funding to do it with. And I've also received calls where people say, well, this is just for a few years that you'll get over this financial hurdle. This financial hurdle is forever. It's for the rest of our life, and so as we know it. And so therefore, it's very important that we as a community talk about this and talk about all the ways that this impacts the lives of the people in our community. Thank you.
Councilwoman Barbara Sexton Smith.
Thank you, Mayor Fisher, and I want to thank the Colonel for his training and his commitment to the men and women of Louisville Fire and Rescue, and especially to the training class. And I think the question that all of us in the community must ask ourselves, are you willing, am I willing to run right into a fire and face death on every step that I take whilst I'm looking for that man or that woman or that child that is screaming for someone to come save them? The men and women of Louisville Fire and Rescue do that every day. They sign up to be trained to do that. If you're part of the LMPD group, and the men and women that run into the line of fire, run toward that danger every day of their life, as they walk out of the homes where they live, they say goodbye to whomever is important to them and meaningful in their life, and they do not know if they're going to come home that night because of the job that they signed up to do. So they run into that danger every day, and they do it willingly, and they do it because we ask them to. We, the elected officials, and we, the taxpayers, and we, the citizens in this community. So I am not going to support cuts in public safety. I would not be a responsible elected official if I did that. I don't think anyone in this county wants any of the elected officials to support cutting jobs that are there for the very reason to protect and save lives of everyone in this county. There's not extra money to be cut. Just a few years ago, we had 6,100 employees in Metro Louisville. Under Mayor Fisher's administration and leadership, the efficiencies and the effectiveness that they have put in place have now brought us to 5,500 employees in Metro government. So how many more, the question is, how many more employees can we have in Metro Louisville and still receive all of the things that we demand? I say we don't cut services, we don't cut safety. What we do is we stand up and we do what the men and women behind us are doing, and that is running into a difficult situation. Embrace the difficult situation, and that is being elected officials and having to bring the community into a conversation and talk about raising revenue. I've never met an elected official that says, I want to raise taxes, but I'm here to say I am willing to sponsor. I am sponsoring this ordinance along with other council members because it's the right thing to do at the right time for the right reason. Because as a society, we're going to be judged by how well we take care of the least of us and all of us. I'm not willing to leave anyone out in the cold. I'm not willing to leave anyone unsafe. And we don't have to. Louisville, we've been lucky. We've been lucky. Not one time in the history of this merged government that I'm proud to be a part of, not one time have we increased taxes. We've been lucky. We've been lucky to have good, strong leadership that produces economic development, that produces revenue stream. Now it's our turn. So will you stand up and say, count me in, I'm willing to do my part. That's all we're asking. So colleagues, thank you all for standing with us and beside us. And at this time, I'd like to see if Councilman Bill Hollander or Councilman Markus Winkler would like to say something.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody in the Louisville Fire Department. We had a good discussion last night at Metro Council Budget Committee. We had a number of members there, and that's good. I think Markus Winkler made the best comment, which is what we need to have is a discussion about how we're going to move going forward. We have an invoice from the Kentucky Retirement Systems, which in fiscal year 20, beginning in July, will be $20 million bigger than the invoice we had 2 years ago. And the year after that, it'll be $30 million bigger, and then 40, and then 50, and then 60 by fiscal year 23. We have to pay that invoice. And so the question is, how are we going to pay it? And are the cuts that have been laid out by the mayor acceptable to this community? We'll have a fact-based discussion about that at the Metro Council Budget Committee over the next 5 weeks. And we'll lay out the schedule for that, which will include some public engagement by early next week in a press release. I think at the end of the day, when people's questions are answered, we'll conclude that the cuts that we would have to make are not acceptable to this community. They would put us in a downward spiral that we don't want to go to. And so I hope people will get engaged in the conversation, and let's keep continuing to talk about what we're going to do going forward in a very fact-based way. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't want to reiterate what everybody else has said, but just to summarize and finish, we have $65 million that we have to fund, right? The choice is you cut or you raise revenue. And as Councilwoman Sexton Smith said, no one takes pleasure in raising taxes. I mean, it's not a good choice. But we have two bad choices, and our option is to pick the least bad choice. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter why we are where we are. We have a bill for $65 million, and math is not partisan. You cannot cut $65 million out of a $620 million budget without feeling the impacts. And the thing that I hear over and over again from people throughout the city is, I think in general, people aren't happy with government in the abstract. But when you start to talk about what are the actual services that government provides, it's police, it's fire, it's EMS, it's our parks, it's our libraries. And when you think about those costs and the cuts, when we go to the library, do you not want the libraries open on Sunday? When you call 911, do you want it to take longer for an operator to answer? Do you want it to take longer for the police to come, or the fire to come, or EMS to come? Those are the real impacts. When we have snow events, do you want snow removal? When you call about a pothole, do you want the pothole fixed? These are the real impacts that we are facing. And if we do not find the incremental funding, the only alternative is that all of those services are impacted. And I would call upon all of us to think about those impacts, whether those are the things that we want, and whether those are the things that will ultimately lead skilled workers and employers to move to our city, to put forward the economic growth that we all want and that build a strong and vibrant Louisville. Making these cuts aren't without cost. You can cut all of these things, but those cuts aren't free. There are costs down the road when you don't fund things like the Scholar House, when you have a high crime rate. Those costs will show up down the road, and it is incumbent on all of us, on the Metro Council, in the mayor's office, and all of us as citizens to consider that we can't kick this can down the road. We must solve this problem, and the way to solve this problem is by addressing both revenue, responsible cuts, okay, and finding a solution that keeps our city a great place to live. Thank you.
Okay, so you've heard about the cuts, and these are real cuts. The other issue that Councilman Winkler just kind of referred to is asking our citizens, what kind of city do we want to be? We outlined on Wednesday that amongst our 19 peer cities, we're the fourth lowest in terms of our ratio of city employees to total population. So the message I hope that y'all are reporting and that people understand by that is we're already a lean operation here. We've been working on that for the 8 years of our administration and before that as well. So then the question is, if we're already lean, how do we deal with this issue? And what we're supporting here, and obviously these leaders behind me here have put forth a bill that they're sponsoring to raise revenue, and a bill that I put forth with them. It's a reasonable phased-in increase to our city's insurance premium taxes that are now at 5%. Some of these would then go to 12.5% and 15%. We excluded auto insurance. Why? Because if you live in low-income areas of our city, generally, you're paying a significantly higher premium for your automobile insurance. So we thought that should not be included because it would have a regressive impact on the people that can least afford it. So that's not changing in this proposal. It's the other lines of insurance that are. Home insurance, life insurance, marine, malpractice insurance, title insurance, umbrella coverage, those type of things. People can take a look at what their insurance bill is, and then they can easily calculate it. And we'll be putting out some aids to make that easy for folks as well so they can see exactly what it means to them. The average family's home insurance rate would increase by $12 to $13 a month. or about 40 cents a day to maintain the level of services that we have right now that are always improving, by the way. So none of us wish this was necessary, but it absolutely is, and it's something we'll be dealing with here over the next 5 weeks. We've talked about our city's great momentum. Why do we want to shoot ourselves in the foot right now? Now is the time to accelerate even further as we compete against cities that are investing far greater amounts in the improvement of their cities than we are. And when you think about the image of closing a firehouse, that is not the image of a city on the rise. That's something that would just be silly to do. So we believe in our city up here. We're going to fight for our city. We're going to continue to invest in our city. We encourage people to get the facts. They can find the facts at louisvilleky.gov/budget FY1920. Please study it. And then I would encourage you, after all your deliberation and after all the work that you've seen us do over these past 8 years, and after all the 80,000 jobs that have been created and 2,700 new businesses and crime stats and all the stats going in the right direction, say, we can't jeopardize this. We got to keep these investment levels going. Call your Metro Council person and please tell them to vote yes when this vote comes up on March 21st. Okay, thank you guys for coming out. We got any questions?
For the third of the city budget that isn't public safety related, are you taking off the table any major cuts to that, like council members, NDF funds, or external agency funds?
No, if you saw in the $65 million example we put out, all those are in there. There's nothing off the table. So we're zeroing out, in the $65 million scenario, you zero out external agency funds, funds to the council, community ministries, those all go to zero.
Those are all being eliminated.
In the $65 million scenario. In the proposal, in what we put forward, the proposed cuts. I mean, ultimately what that will all come down to, Joe, is when the budget is put forth, and then I'll put it forth and then negotiate with the council, and then that will be the final budget. But in the potential list of cuts at $65 million, that's the, in addition to all the public safety cuts, those are on there as well. Have you seen the list?
Yes, but what I'm saying is, if you do cut all of that, you raise taxes by a lower amount. If you're not, you're zeroing out NDF funds.
Yeah, it can be. Look, we're putting forward a plan that we believe that any cuts are damaging to the momentum of our city. So, but you can certainly raise more revenue. You can raise less revenue. You can have more cuts. You can have less cuts. So it's just some combination of all of that. Does that help you? Right now we got two scenarios. One is $65 million in cuts. The other one is $65 million in revenue. There could be a $50 million revenue and $15 million in cuts.
Does that have to be decided before March 23rd or whatever?
The decision of, when will the date be? Is it March 21? Is the decision on March 21st? The revenue decision on March 21st will dictate what the budget will end up being. So if it's a $50 million of additional revenue, there will be $15 million of cuts in the next budget.
There was some criticism of the budget committee meeting last night that the city last year should have dealt with the $10 million president's bill increase in a more sustainable way, so that this year they weren't looking at a $20 million hole. Do you have a response to that?
Yeah. Do you want to handle that, Bill, or you want me to?
I think you heard several members last night say that what we did last year in order to balance the budget is something that's been done many years in the past. And quite frankly, not a single member of the Metro Council objected to that last year when we had meetings with Metro Council members as we went through. The point that was being made, there was some non-recurring revenue that only recurs every 4 years that we won't have this year. We won't have it for the next 3 years. But we were faced with the situation of balancing the budget last year. And I think it's important that the public understand that we have been making cuts. 49 positions were eliminated in last year's budget. So we are going to continue to look for efficiencies and additional cuts where we can do that. But the kind of cuts that would be needed to make up this $65 million hole are just not acceptable in terms of the services that we'd lose in the community. We're having a discussion, and I think people need to understand what the situation is, what would happen if we had these kind of service cuts, what kind of downward spiral we'll be in, and when they do, I'm confident they'll vote to invest in our city.
What was the vote last year, 22 to 3 for the budget?
Something like that.
Yeah. I mean, the council vote for the budget last year, I think, was it 22 to 3? It's something that. So, I mean, so that every year, as Bill said, there's all kinds of budget adjustments that are made. And like this year, for revenues not coming in, you've got all the detail, right? So then we've got to stop and say, okay, what happened? How did it happen? And then how do we adjust going forward? So it's basically the same process that we followed every year. It's just this year it's a little more extreme, obviously, because of the pension impact that we've got coming forward. Anything else?
Has anyone come to your office or offered anyone with an alternative that would save money?
No, and I hope they do. As you know, I go around the community a lot, as you know. It's easy to say in the abstract we got to cut, right? And then when you say, okay, well, please give us your proposal, we're still waiting for that, and I hope we get some, because we will take a look at any good idea. We are not infallible up here, but I can tell you when we go and we're at a public safety briefing and talk about the important work, for instance, that Louisville Fire does, and then when you see the folks that could be impacted by this, or if you're at an arts program that we were at this morning in the middle of the Russell neighborhood and you see the kids that receive external agency grants, you know, people are starting to understand that this has a real human impact on this as well. This is not just a clinical spreadsheet exercise for us. So I'm encouraged by the type of feedback we're getting where people are saying, you know what, I'm willing to do my part for my city. We've got good momentum now. Let's keep it going. Let's send that signal out to the rest of the world that we have to invest to win. I haven't heard any alternatives, Bill. I mean, Bill is, you know, the chairs the budget committee.
So we have not heard any alternatives, and we've frankly put out a challenge on that. I don't think it's responsible to say we can do all of this through cuts without saying what those cuts are. So we're all ears. We would listen to any kind of proposal. But I think the public should demand, if people are saying there are cuts we could make that would generate $65 million and we can pay this bill that we have from the retirement systems, let's know exactly what those cuts are.
All right, and closing, and there's a blame game doesn't help here. Okay, you know, whether it's blaming somebody else, we got a bill, we got to pay it. So we're focused on moving forward, keeping our investments going in our city, and I hope the council will join us in this effort. And again, I want to thank our co-sponsors up here for showing the leadership to take a tough decision. That's what we got to do sometime when you lead. Okay, thanks everybody. Have a good weekend.